who have decided to join Vilnius Consultations 2020. Thanks for all panelists and the participants who decided to join us. I am Virginia Budiene, the director of Vilnius Institute for Policy Analysis. This is already the third year of Vilnius Consultations. Thanks to the new world of technology in this pandemic world, we can come together from different parts of the world to discuss hot topics online. This year's Vilnius Consultations consists of 3 sessions, but the sessions are connected under one title: Is it the end of the world as we know it? Security and resilience in post-pandemic recovery. Today we will have the second session discussion, and it will be about emerging hybrid strategies in pandemic era. And I want to thank everybody who are interested and joined us in this discussion. It is not only the health safety in the pandemic world that matters. We are facing new hybrid threats, for example, info-demics, but also solidarity we're facing of our societies in terms of what's happening in the world around us. Especially for Lithuania and Latvia and Poland, it is important what's happening in neighborhood in Belarus. Today we will talk about changing nature of our world as we used to know it, and new hybrid threats in the pandemic or post-pandemic world. Now I would like to pass the word to the moderator of today's consultations, Donatas Puslys, who is the Director of Media and Democracy Program at Vilnius Institute for Policy Analysis. Donatas, turn is yours.
Thank you, Virginia. Actually, it's my pleasure to be this evening with you, and thank you also, Virginia, for introducing this panel. So you did my job pretty well. And now I only have to introduce our speakers for this event. So special thanks for all the panelists. Susanne Spahn, who joins us from Germany. She's an independent researcher, journalist, and political scientist. Also, we have with us Eric Povel, who is a program officer at Nato Public Diplomacy Division. Also, we have with us Markus Kolga, Senior Fellow at MacDonald-Laurier Institute, and also my colleague Marius Laurinavičius, who is a Senior Expert in Vilnius Institute for Policy Analysis. So briefly about the way how it will go today, we will start with introductory remarks from each of the panelists. And you will have 10 minutes for your introduction. I advise everyone who is participating write the questions in the comment section. I will be able to ask those questions afterwards, and also I will have my own questions to ask the participants. So maybe we could start with Susanne.
So do you hear me now? Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to this panel. My topic is Russian disinformation on the corona crisis in Germany. And I would like to give some examples to you. So, and show you my presentation. So Russian disinformation in Germany has significantly increased since 2014 due to the Maidan events in Ukraine. Russia's broadcaster RT started a German program, and Rossiya Sivonia launched a news and radio portal, Sputnik News. Since then, the video agency Raptly has greatly invested in the social media sector and runs channels that address different parts of society. Its aim is to create a counter-public to German mainstream media that is accused of hiding the truth. Therefore, the leading RT Deutsch show is named The Missing Part. The strategy of the Russian state media is to present the Russian official policy line as independent and alternative position, thereby using widespread mistrust in the population towards traditional media outlets. The Russian media tried to split society and push controversial issues. Reporting shows a strong division between friends and enemies. On the one hand, pro-Russian political parties such as the left and the right-wing populist party Alternative for Germany are depicted positively. This was especially obvious in the run-up to the elections, the federal ones, the regional ones, and even the European ones. On the other hand, parts of society that are critical of the Russian leadership, and especially the German government, are very negatively portrayed as enemies of Russia and Russophobic. Corona is just another crisis that is being used to split and polarize society. Before that, it was the migrant crisis and Brexit. The message is always the same. The German government and the EU aren't able to cope with challenges they face. Reports paint a picture of chaos and numerous threats for the population. Suspicious experts predict the collapse of Germany and the EU. In contrast to this, Russian leadership and especially its President Putin are portrayed as effective managers who even help people in need abroad. So now I would like to show some examples to you about this, about the Corona crisis that reveal this typical argumentation patterns of Russia's media reporting. So here you can see this favorite RT Deutsch show, The Missing Part. And this episode under the headline Only Scare Tactics was one of the most popular ones. It has had nearly 1 million viewers. So this is really a success story for RT Deutsch. And what was it telling about? The German authorities and police were accused of conducting a senseless and brutal war against German citizens. A doctor presented in the show claimed that there has been no epidemic at all. The crisis was just a pretext for the governments to violate citizens' rights and to strengthen its own power. The end is also very typical for RT programs. A representative of another alternative outlet predicts that the crash of the system is already going on and the end will happen soon. So, and now I'll show you another example from Sputnik. So Sputnik marches to the same tune, warning that policemen can even use guns to force people to stay in quarantine. Sputnik uses fake news to paint its own scenario of horror. However, the use of guns in this context is not allowed. So this is clearly fake news, what Sputnik is showing. Another characteristic of Russian media's reporting is that they side with protest movements. This was obvious concerning the anti-Merkel movement before the federal elections, concerning anti-migrant movement, and again, anti-corona movement. So here you can see a report about the anti-corona protests in Berlin. And RT Deutsch did an interview with Mr. Kennedy. So he's the nephew of President John F. Kennedy, and he joined the protests against corona measures in Berlin. He said, "Today I'm here because Germany is a frontline. My uncle came here almost 60 years ago and did his I'm a Berliner speech. At that time, Germany was a frontline against totalitarianism. And today, the same thing is happening. Governments impose authoritarian control on populations." Besides that, Kennedy tells us that RT is the only channel where freedom of speech is possible. RT is presented as the voice of free Germany and America. So that's a conversion of history. In Berlin, Kennedy amplified the conspiracy theory that the COVID virus is allegedly being spread by the G5 mobile network. So, and now let us have a look at the other side of the reporting, the positive reports. They show, for example, Russia helping Italy by sending specialists and equipment. So this campaign called From Russia with Love was really very well organized, and there were many reports about this issue. And of course, concerning the Russian leader Sputnik, we had a picture series showing him as an effective manager, how he solves the problem with the coronavirus in Russia. Although I must admit, as the number of incidents in Russia is rising up to 1 million, these kind of reports are decreasing. So finally, I would like to have a look at the range of the Russian media in Germany. So please have a look at the followers on Facebook. You can see that Sputnik Germany has around 268,000 followers. And RT Deutsch is more successful, has around 506,000 followers. That is, of course, not much compared to our branch leader, Spiegel Online, with approximately 2 million. But it's better than our German broadcaster, Deutsche Welle. The German service has less subscribers than RT Deutsch. So this is a success, of course. What's very interesting to see these new social media channels I was talking about that were launched just recently, Redfish and In the Now. So you can see they are really popular. Redfish has about 661,000 followers, and In the Now even 5 million. So this is really a success story. So finally, I would like to draw my conclusion. These examples show how the Russian media try to split society. German authorities impose an authoritarian regime that violates rights and even use force against citizens. The crash of Germany is just a matter of time, is the main message. On the other hand, the Russian President Putin is depicted as effective manager. The aim of this reporting is obvious. On the one hand, to weaken the German government and support opposition and protest against it. On the other hand, to expand Russian influence and narratives in Germany and present this as an alternative opinion. The corona crisis once again demonstrates that the Russian media are a weapon in an information war. So thank you for listening and looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, dear Susanne. The question time will arrive. I see we have participants who are listening, following our discussion. So I just remind you that below in the Zoom, you can find a section called chat. So you can write down your questions in there and I will read them and ask the participants for the comments and answers. And now I would like to pass the microphone, the virtual microphone to Mr. Eric Povel, who is the program officer at NATO Public Diplomacy Division, and thanks for NATO Public Diplomacy Division for supporting this year's Vilnius consultations. So, dear Eric, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Donatas, and thanks to VIPA for inviting me as well on this interesting panel. I would like to talk today about sort of NATO's perspective on hybrid warfare and how we see our role in countering it. Of course, Russia's annexation of Crimea in March 2014 was the greatest challenge for the post-Cold War European security architecture. The hybrid warfare used by Russia in the conflict in and around Ukraine was not new. What was new was the combination and the coordinated application of a wide range of political, civil, and military instruments to achieve strategic objectives. Due to the digital revolution, the cyber world and social media, we now have to confront adversaries who meddle in democratic elections, manipulate information, spread fake news, and attack our infrastructure. The actions undertaken by Russia, in particular, have indicated a coordinated approach based on central coherent planning at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels. Unlike in the West, the Russian state controls all levers of power, military as well as political, economic, cyber, and informational. This gives Russia a certain advantage in applying all these state tools in the hybrid domain. Hybrid strategies are particularly aimed at complicating decision-making processes. That is why they are such a challenge for a democratic alliance like NATO. For NATO to act, 30 allies must agree. This requires clarity about the threat. If this clarity is missing, NATO runs the risk of acting either too late or not at all. Hybrid strategies can be applied at all levels and in different geographic theaters simultaneously. Russia has not employed a hybrid strategy against Ukraine alone. Rather, it has adopted a hybrid model that targets Ukraine and the nations and organizations that Russia sees as opponents of its global aims and interests. Defending against hybrid threats is therefore a task both for individual national governments and for the international organizations of which those nations are member. Our approach to countering hybrid threats. In the early stages of a hybrid campaign, hostile actions are likely to constitute principally an internal security challenge. It is therefore the nation that is exposed to such a campaign that has the primary responsibility to respond. This requires a whole of government, even a whole of society response that combines all instruments as part of a national plan. Nations may also turn to allies and to the wider international community for assistance. This leads to the question of NATO's approach to hybrid threats. Can NATO rise to the challenge? The answer is a clear yes. Hybrid campaigns are not magic. They can be detected, deterred, and defeated. Our counter-hybrid strategy, which we agreed in 2015, has laid the basis for a comprehensive response. The strategy divides our approach into three phases: prepare, deter, and defend. Firstly, on prepare. The first and foremost objective in preparing to counter hybrid warfare is to better understand the phenomenon of hybrid war itself. To this end, NATO continuously collects and evaluates information to identify seemingly unrelated events as hybrid campaigns and to identify their perpetrators. Another major element of preparation is to become more resilient. NATO can help allies identify national vulnerabilities and thus strengthen their resilience. At the last NATO defense ministers meeting in June this year, allies agreed to further update NATO's baseline requirements for national resilience. These baseline requirements cover critical sectors such as energy, transport, and communications, including the impact of 5G and other new technologies. They address threats from cyber, the security of supply chains, and foreign ownership and control of infrastructure. At the national level, this includes coherent and up-to-date national crisis response procedures, well-developed security and defense structures, capabilities and civil preparedness, as well as transparent and respected governance. At both the national and supranational level, accurate and shared intelligence and comprehensive analysis are fundamental to the identification of hybrid threats, recognition of their employment, and anticipation of the need to react. Resilient critical infrastructure and strong cyber defenses are also essential. Secondly, to deter. While the concept of deterrence seems to have worked well in the Cold War context, deterrence in a hybrid context works quite differently. Perhaps we must accept that some hybrid threats cannot be deterred, but also that this is somehow acceptable as long as they do not cause existential damage and threaten national security. In some cases, a whole of government preparedness might help deter an adversary contemplating the employment of a hybrid strategy against a nation. Military and civil preparedness postures and means are complementary. From an alliance perspective, strong political will and allied solidarity, including visible military deterrence, may prevent a hybrid campaign and prevent it evolving into military conflict. We need to continue to update our toolbox of responses so that we are ready and able to take decisions rapidly in order to change an adversary's cost-benefit calculus and avoid escalation. The Alliance already has a number of instruments that can directly assist allies in countering hybrid threats. Conventional and nuclear capabilities will remain at the heart of NATO's deterrence and defense posture. Special operations forces will also be in high demand in hybrid scenarios. In the civil preparedness area, alliance instruments are designed to achieve two principal aims. First, to assist nations in improving their national resilience to threats, and secondly, ensuring that the military can make effective use of civilian resources and infrastructure. The third element, to defend. Should deterrence fail, or if a hybrid campaign escalates to full or traditional military conflict, the nation under attack will look to the alliance and international organizations to which it belongs for assistance. Allies have been clear that a hybrid attack has the potential to trigger Article 5, our collective defense clause. We have expanded our counter-hybrid toolbox in the last few years. So the approval of NATO's counter-hybrid strategy in 2015 was an important step. Since then, we have significantly expanded our toolbox with new and effective tools. One such tool is enhanced intelligence sharing. We established the Joint Intelligence and Security Division in NATO's international staff, which includes a unit specifically dedicated to analyzing hybrid threats. A further step towards the successful defense against hybrid threats is the deepening of relations between NATO and the European Union. Since the 2016 Warsaw Summit, NATO and the EU have agreed to intensify cooperation and signed off on 74 concrete measures, of which hybrid is one of the most important and urgent ones. Through informal cooperation at the working level, both institutions have developed so-called playbooks to coordinate their respective responses to hybrid activities and have started to engage in parallel and coordinated exercises, what we call PACE. The harmonization of the positions of both institutions is supported by the European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats, established by Finland. Based in Helsinki, the center analyzes hybrid threats, but also serves as a forum for informal talks between NATO and EU staffs. NATO's exercises are also being adapted to the challenge of hybrid threats. By introducing hybrid elements into the scenarios, political and military decision makers are forced to address the dilemmas that hybrid threats can pose, such as the challenge of deciding on collective action in cases where an opponent's attacks stay below the kinetic level. Another NATO tool to respond to hybrid threats is the newly created counter-hybrid support team concept. Such a support team consists of civilian and possibly military experts who can be sent at an ally's request. We had the first such team deploy to Montenegro for a short period last November. A support team can be deployed in a crisis, but given the expertise of its members in strategic communications, counterintelligence, or the protection of critical infrastructure, it can also act as an advisory team for setting up national structures that are better geared towards meeting hybrid threats. These teams are a clear sign of NATO's ability to respond to threats below the threshold of Article 5. Progress has also been made in the area of attribution of hybrid activities. Attribution remains a sovereign decision by each state. In response to the Russian attempt to kill a former double agent in Salisbury in the UK in March 2018, most NATO and EU member states supported the UK's assessment that publicly attributed the assault to Russia, and NATO allies and partner countries consequently expelled numerous Russian diplomats. Naming and shaming, backed up with demonstrated resolve, could have a deterrent effect against at least some hybrid actors. The multifaceted nature of hybrid threats has also prompted NATO's political leadership to try out new meeting formats. In May 2019, for example, the first ever informal meeting of the North Atlantic Council with national security advisors took place, focusing on hybrid challenges. A further area of significant effort for NATO in countering hybrid strategies is the information domain. We are actively monitoring disinformation and propaganda campaigns by both state and non-state actors. We are also seeing disinformation aimed at eroding trust in deployed NATO troops as part of our enhanced forward presence in the Baltic states and Poland. In April, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland were the target of concurrent disinformation campaigns. These three campaigns aimed to promote divisions within the alliance, and they used the same tactics and techniques, including forgeries and fake personas. A fake letter was even sent in the Secretary General's name, claiming that NATO would withdraw its troops from Lithuania. This is not the case, but this tactic shows the importance of remaining vigilant, because especially in a pandemic situation as we have now, disinformation can endanger lives. NATO works closely with all allies and partners to counter disinformation. We are also working with the EU and the UN on this. Concluding, yes, hybrid warfare is a difficult challenge for a classical political military alliance with 30 democracies around the table. But we are facing this challenge. We've made a lot of progress since 2014, when a particular hybrid threat from Russia became apparent to our nations. We have a much deeper understanding of the challenge. We have created new tools, and we have strengthened links with other organizations, notably the EU. As the saying goes, it takes a network to defeat a network. We are determined to building this counter-hybrid network and to protect the safety of our more than 900 million citizens. Thanks, that's it from me.
Thank you, dear Eric. Before I pass the virtual microphone to Markus Koldov, who is the senior fellow at MacDonald Laurier Institute, I would just like to make a short clarification. So the questions can be sent to us using not the chat section, but Q&A section. And here we already have one question. But I will firstly give floor to all the panelists, and then we will start with the Q&A session. So, dear Markus, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Donatas. I just want to make sure, can you hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Again, thanks so much, Donatas, and to the Vilnius Institute for inviting me to participate today. It's an enormous honor and pleasure to join you, and it's great to see some familiar faces here. Marius, it's good to see you. We saw each other last year in Toronto, of course. There are clearly myriad ways by which the Kremlin has taken advantage of this global pandemic, from the poisoning of Alexei Navalny the other week to Russia's failed mass diplomacy in Italy and the US. But today, I'm going to talk to you about how the Kremlin has used COVID as fuel for its information warfare and its efforts to divide Western societies from a Canadian perspective, and how the Kremlin has developed grassroots diaspora organizations, also known as astroturf groups, and a network of influencers to aggressively agitate and activate them. When we talk about the Kremlin's disinformation war, we first have to recognize that its objective is not to constructively argue in support of a specific Russian interest, as much as it is to simply shatter any resistance to them by breaking down alliances, social cohesion within Western liberal nations that conflict with Vladimir Putin's objectives. Without understanding the motivation and intent driving the Kremlin's manufactured narratives, they may appear to be random and easily dismissed in Western states as simply being bizarre fringe conspiracy theories that no one really pays serious attention to. In the context of health-related information warfare, the Kremlin first discovered its divisive potential in Canada in 2014, when the provincial government in Ontario proposed an update to its primary and secondary school sex education curriculum, which included subjects such as LGBTQ and gender issues. Among the first and most vocal groups to oppose those changes were, unremarkably, pro-Kremlin Russian-Canadian groups, which were set up in the wake of Maidan and the invasion of Crimea. Ukrainian community organizations in Canada had proven to be so effective at communicating and advocating for the pro-Maidan side that the Kremlin clearly decided to try and replicate them to promote their interests and transmit their own narratives. In such an ethnically diverse nation like Canada, organizations that represent diaspora groups are highly respected by governments at all levels, and they have the opportunity to positively affect policy decisions. With 400,000 Russian speakers living in Canada, the Kremlin woke up to the powerful potential of harnessing this group as a tool for advancing its interests and goals. The Russian Congress in Canada appeared immediately after Euromaidan and the invasion of Crimea in the fall of 2014. Their first statement, not surprisingly, accused the Ukrainian army in Donbass of war crimes. They accused the Canadian federal government of lying about the nature of the Russian Orthodox Church, and it's worth noting that the head of the Russian Orthodox Church in Canada was one of the founders of the Russian Congress. And they took a far-right extremist position to advocate against the government's sex education curriculum, a rather arbitrary and random choice on the surface. Within a few weeks of forming, the Russian Congress organized a seminar against the curriculum, inviting far-right groups to participate, and then helped organize protests. It's important to note that there was no previous or pre-existing opposition to the health education initiative. But thanks to the Russian Congress, there emerged a coalition of socially extreme groups that promoted wild disinformation about the initiative, which had the effect of broadly polarizing voters based on false information, propaganda, and lies. The Canadian editor of Russia's leading domestic propaganda newspaper, Komsomolskaya Pravda, warned in her column that the government was creating an environment where, quote unquote, 11 to 13-year-olds may well rape an 8-year-old. Such statements read in a widely circulated newspaper, both in Russia and in Canada amongst Russian speakers, would cause any naive reader to panic and question the credibility and honesty of the government representing them. So successful were these groups that the sex education issue became a topic of debate within mainstream center-right political parties. Yet these efforts are not just limited to health-related issues. Those same pro-Kremlin groups have also undertaken a mass campaign to manipulate historical facts and glorify a highly militarized version of Soviet history, one that embraces Soviet symbols and rehabilitates the legacy of Stalin. In 2015, the May 9 Victory Day Parade in Toronto was attended by thousands of people, including, most worryingly, politicians, and credible politicians from all three levels of government. The Victory Day rallies in Canada, which are closely supported by the Russian government and their Compatriots program, promote the narrative of the Soviet Union as a savior and liberator of the Baltic states and Ukraine, not just from the Nazis, but from the Balts and Ukrainians themselves. Anyone who challenges this propaganda is labeled a fascist. I've had personal experience with this, as has Canada's Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland. The intended outcome of these narratives, as much as any other, is to sow doubts among Canadian policymakers, media, and the general public about the reliability of countries like Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia as NATO partners, and provokes questions about whether Canada should be leading the NATO Enhanced Forward Presence mission in Latvia at all, and the training mission in Ukraine. Thankfully, the Russian Congress was called out as a Kremlin-aligned organization in 2017 when Canada's parliament was concluding its final debates on Magnitsky sanctioning legislation. A Toronto area parliamentarian, John McKay, gave a speech exposing the Russian Congress's surreptitious effort to derail the law, identifying them as advocating for the Kremlin's interests. The global pandemic has, as we all know, offered the Kremlin a new avenue through which to advance its efforts to polarize Western societies. The promotion of the COVID pandemic as a hoax and a conspiracy carried out by global elites is a dominant narrative, just as anti-vax conspiracy theories were promoted in the past. It comes as no surprise, as Susanne has mentioned, that Russian media amplified the recent anti-pandemic restrictions demonstration in Berlin. Kremlin-aligned Facebook groups in Canada, some of which have over 30,000 members, promoted an anti-mask pandemic demonstration that took place in Montreal this past weekend under the guise of supporting personal freedom. Russian flags, along with several QAnon conspiracy flags, were photographed by Canada's national broadcaster at a rally where such expressions of nationalism had no clear place. These Kremlin-aligned groups consistently promote narratives and conspiracy theories about Big Pharma and Bill Gates and George Soros' role in COVID, all of which align with domestic far-right and far-left messaging. The objective of this disinformation is to intensify the divisions that the COVID pandemic has already caused, to give those who are frustrated by isolation, physical distancing, and the need to wear a mask a target for their frustrations, while potentially putting their families, friends, and neighbors at risk of contracting it. While those who respect government guidance and protocols become frustrated with those who do not, setting the stage for conflict. All the while, the credibility of health officials and leaders are questioned, undermining their expertise and authority, and ultimately eroding trust in government, media, society, and each other. While the total impact of these operations are yet unknown, the intent, along with the threat to our democracies, is clear to most of us. Yet the Canadian government, sadly, has been very slow to recognize the threat of foreign interference and information warfare, dismissing it primarily as a problem that affects elections. When states like Russia and China leverage the threat that COVID poses to global health in order to advance their own interests by promoting disinformation about it, we cannot ignore the role they play in intensifying the pandemic. Doing so threatens the stability of the liberal Western order, our alliances, our nations, and most importantly, the lives of our citizens. Canada has much to learn from Lithuania and our other Eastern NATO partners in how to deal with Kremlin information warfare. I would propose the creation of an interparliamentary association to provide a forum for like-minded members of Western parliaments that focuses on the threat posed by the Putin regime to our security, our democracies, and societies, to share information and ideas, our successes and our failures, in order to develop greater overall resilience for our democracies and societies against those who seek to subvert them. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, dear Marcus, for your insights and for the proposal also. And now I would like to give floor to my colleague, Marius Laurinavičius. So Marius, welcome.
Thank you, Donatas. And I'm really happy to be with all of you here today, but it's always easy and difficult to be the last speaker at such panels. It's also always difficult because many things which should be discussed are already said, and I fully agree with all the previous speakers, but it's also easy because I can say that I share all the others' opinions and there. But of course I have prepared introductory remarks. But my remarks would slightly differ from the others. And my topic would be that we definitely don't see the end of the world we have seen before, at least in terms of hybrid warfare. I really see that there is no difference, at least from Lithuanian perspective, there is no difference between the situation during pandemic and the situation we have witnessed before. I will start from our own Lithuanian perspective, and it might surprise you, but I should say that even working at the topic of Russian hybrid warfare, I haven't noticed any real Russian campaign in Lithuania during this period. Yes, we had several incidents, I would call them incidents, and the one was already mentioned by Eric. This letter in the name of Secretary General of Nato, forged document, which was made public. But I should say two things. The first thing is that it wasn't even a part of any campaign. It was just a separate incident. And the other thing is that this incident had, I can say, even no effect at all. It was just, well, debunked in hours, I would say, or even in 1 or 2 hours. and had no effect at all. Absolutely. Our situation shows, to my mind, our situation shows two things. The first thing what we should discuss when we think about hybrid warfare, it's our own vulnerabilities. Hybrid warfare, it's much more about our own vulnerabilities than about the any new inventions of our adversaries. They use, to my mind, they use not even something new in this period of pandemic. They use the old Soviet tactics of KGB, which we call active measures. It's absolutely the same thing. So we are aware about that. And it's really about our own vulnerabilities. And I can say that Lithuania, at least to my mind, is much less vulnerable and much more resilient to these hybrid threats than some other countries in our democratic world. That's why it's our advantage, and we are much more safe in this case. And the other thing is that during this, at least this first wave of pandemic, Lithuania was not as much affected as the other countries in terms of pandemic itself. So it was not as vulnerable in this sense as the other countries. And that might be the other reason why we haven't witnessed all these campaigns, I should call them this way. As I said, we have witnessed several incidents, but that's it. So what I see in more general terms, during the pandemics, I saw at least 4 different tactics of Russia, and some of them might be applied as well to China. So first of all is to sow discord among allies. And for me, that was the main strategy and the main tactics of the whole strategy. And we should mention all these, again, I should call them incidents, like saying that President Trump wanted to steal some vaccine from Germany, or some companies just made to change their choices and to sell some medicine to, let's say, United States instead of Germany or France. Even we had even once a similar incident in Lithuania, when it was publicly the information was made public that Poland has bought some part of equipment and medicine which was devoted for Lithuania before that. So it was widespread all around the widespread campaign all around the world, not just separate incidents. And we had some of them even in Lithuania. And all of that was meant to sow discord among allies. And that was really, really a powerful campaign. I would say it was a powerful campaign, and it made quite a lot of damage for our relations among, let's say, among Germany and United States, among other allies. So this was the first part of strategy. The second was to weaken our democracies, and it was already mentioned by Susanne that they tried to portray our countries like this is a narrative of failed state. They use in any case where they can do it. So this was used very, very powerfully again, and we saw it all around the world. The third one was to instigate conflict inside the societies, And first of all, the best example from my perspective, it would be in the United States, where the society was divided between these who were for this stricter restrictions and quarantine, and the others who were for this freedom of choice. And they exploited disinformation campaign of Russia, exploited it very well, at least exploited it very well. I suspect, I have no proof of that, that they tried even to instigate that. And it might be the case with the riots in United States, which followed all these debates. Of course, it's very different issue, but still, when I look at the beginning of these riots, when I look at the the history of Russian influence operation, about the facts we already know, I really think that we should look deeper into this, the beginning of these riots in the United States, and think about possible Russian influence. And the fourth tactics was to promote authoritarian regimes. So first of all, it was started by China, which even managed, I would say, even managed to tell at least part of our societies that authoritarian China was more successful than our democratic countries in fighting this pandemic. Of course, they were presenting these not real figures of the pandemics in China. They used the other tactics, but it was also a narrative even here in Lithuania that, well, you know, but authoritarian regimes have the other tools to fight these pandemics and to act in such situations, and that is really quite a dangerous narrative for democracy as such, and for promotion of autocracy. So this was one part of that, and of course the other part of that was the whole story in Italy, in the other countries, and this so-called masked diplomacy of China, and Russia used it as well. You can recall this Russian plane in the United States, even in the United States. So these, from my point of view, these were four main tactics of these authoritarian regimes during the pandemic. But if we look at all of them, these are the old tactics, which were used many times in all the different circumstances and different cases already, which were already mentioned, like Ukraine, like migrant crisis, like all the others, you name it. So from my point of view, again, we don't see anything new. So my conclusion would be that we should not even focus on different circumstances or different cases of Russian or Chinese hybrid warfare, and we should devote our attention to a problem as such. And of course, I agree very much with Eric that we need to, and Marcus, that we need to try to, first of all, to research all kind of these tactics and campaigns. But on the other hand, I would suggest that now we know quite enough about all they do. Our task is to educate our societies. And that is exactly what advantage we have here in Lithuania in comparison with all the other countries. Because I really think that our society is much more resilient to that. So this is one of lessons to be learned. The other lesson to be learned from my point of view is the lack of political will. So this is really about us. It's I'm repeating this, repeating myself very often. It's much more about us than about them. Yes, they use different tools. Yes, they do this and that, but it's always about us. And it's not just about educating our societies, it's also about the political will. If we will have this political will to fight back, I mean to fight back internally, to do something to just get rid of our own vulnerabilities, because when we will get rid of our own vulnerabilities, they will have nothing to do. And so this is the thing we should do. And of course, fight back against the regime. It's the second point, which is very important, because still, even talking about Navalny case, which is very important now, it's even in such a situation, it's just about words. I can bet that in 3 months or half a year, we will have the same status of relations with Russia we had before. It's always the same. We had Skripal case, we had Litvinenko case, we had this and that, and it's always about the same. So the second lesson to learn is about the importance of our political will. So we should strengthen our societies, educate them, and societies will ask from our authorities to do something against this hybrid threat. So here I will stop and will be very happy to participate in the discussion.
Thank you, Marius. Very interesting insights. Actually, I would like to use the opportunity as a moderator to ask the first question to all the other participants except Marius, because the question is based on your insights. You said that there were no new tactics used by Kremlin during the pandemic time. Yes, more questions, more targeted zones because of economical situation, because of the situation in Schengen area where the borders were closed. But did any of you notice any new strategies employed by Kremlin or, for example, China during the pandemic era, or was it just same old tactics deployed to serve new circumstances? Yeah, please, Marcus. Yeah.
No, I have to agree with Marius. I think that the tactics that we've seen have all been tried and tested. I mean, we're going back to the Soviet era. They've transformed a little bit. They've adapted these tactics. I think with COVID, and Marius mentioned with the Black Lives Matter movement that's been happening and the conflict in the U.S. right now. What the Russians have become, what the Kremlin has become very good at is identifying those polarizing issues. And what it's become very good at is not just hitting those issues with a single narrative, but identifying narratives that can push the right further to the right, and identify issues on the left that can push them further to the left on those specific issues. And it has become very, very effective at doing that. So I would also be concerned with what's happening in the United States. I'm not sure that there was any sort of campaign. I'm not sure that there's any sort of larger strategy within the Kremlin, but when they are good at identifying these things, when they come up, they're able to react and cause this polarization and divisions. And we talk about how to combat this, and I'd go back to what Eric said earlier about attribution, and Marius mentioned political will. In Canada, this is a very big problem that we have, is that we don't have the political will to identify and place attribution when these attacks happen. And we're also very hesitant to look at the intent. You know, I think it's very important to look at why these things are happening, and this isn't happening in Canada. So, you know, going back to, you know, some of my remarks, there's a lot we can learn from Lithuania. There's a lot we should be listening to our NATO partners and what NATO is doing. And I think that we need to find some consensus within NATO as to how we're going to do this and combat it. But you know, as far as tactics are concerned, no, we're not seeing anything new. We're just seeing an improvement on old tactics.
Thank you. Any other remarks? Eric, please.
I have to unmute. Yeah. No, I think I basically agree with Marcus and Marius about this. As I also said in my introduction, what we saw happening with the hybrid warfare, certainly in 2014 with Ukraine, it was not new. It's a very old thing to do, to confuse the enemy, with propaganda, with disinformation. But of course, what was new for us at that time was the combination of it all. It was such a broad spectrum of tools that they use. Think about also using energy politics to you know, intimidate neighbors. They really use the entire toolbox that they have as a state. So, and I think I also agree with what Marcus says about, and also Marius about, of course, if you talk about NATO, yes, we're a club of 30 democracies. It is about political will, but that political will first has to start with, particularly within our organization, where we have 30 nations sitting around the table. Before we can act, we all have to agree. And that's why I made a big point about, we need first to understand what has happened. And of course, you saw 2014, Ukraine, there was a lot of, in the beginning, when this all started, there was a lot of confusion. And that's also part of the strategy of the Russians, to create confusion, also to confuse our leaders, our decision makers. This is also why I made a big point about that. We have been investing the last few years in, you know, we've created a whole new intelligence division, particularly for that purpose. Firstly, we need to get information from our nations, from our allies. NATO itself does not have an intelligence service. We're dependent on what the nations are willing to share with us. But that's very important. By creating this division, we now get more information from the allies, and we can use it as part of the consensus process. And firstly, to understand, and hopefully, when there is a mutual understanding, that we have also a better way to, and easier way to come to a consensus, if required. But again, with every incident and every thing that is happening, we need to go through the motions of getting 30 nations in line, which of course is, as I said, here you could say Russia can act on its own, the same as China. In that sense, they are at an advantage, and they know this. But ultimately, I think the good thing is that since 2014, I think the learning curve has been very, very steep and quick in most of our nations, I think. Also, the media scene, they know now. They can't take Russia today for granted, or they know what it is, a propaganda tool, just like Sputnik. Every reasonable, knowledgeable journalist knows this now and treats it like this. And I think also that what was said, I think education is a key part of not just educating our policy makers, our decision makers, the media, the security experts, but also the young people, the people in the street. They need to be educated much better on this, what we're being faced, because we're not used to these kind of things in our societies, luckily so. But we have to be not naive anymore and realize that this is what we face. And I think, you know, we get a lot of, till Corona, we had a lot of student groups coming to NATO headquarters, and we had a lot of discussions with them. And you could see that they also start to understand and to become aware of the threat to them, that they have to be very critical when they go on social media, particularly, and all that kind of outlets. And, you know, we all hear about the youth not using regular media anymore for the news, but they get it mostly from social media. And of course, then we say, well, be very critical and see who the source is, and don't believe everything you see there. So I think it's a multitude of tasks, which are also a lot of not where NATO is not responsible for. I think particularly on education, but we're trying to do our most to educate firstly our own people, our own leaders, and our own populations who are dealing with this on a daily basis. Thanks.
Thank you, Virginia.
Yes, I'm unmuted. I think the problem is on the attacking side and on the responding side, responding to the attack. I want to be provocative because I think there is a history that Lithuania has on stopping the RT, for example, transmission in Lithuania. 10 years ago, Lithuania was very much not happy with international organizations' reaction when Lithuania first stopped the RT transmission with the Commission of Radio and TV. Now the world has changed, and Lithuania is not the only country that stops the transmission of the media channels that transmit disinformation. But provocation here is about hate speech, disinformation. Do you know any cases in the courts that disinformation or the channel that makes that is in the court, any cases in the court? I don't know those cases. Is that a problem with the democracy, that hacks, is the hack an attack, like a conventional attack we understand, but the cyber hack, is that de jure the attack and it can be sued in the court? Or disinformation, is that something that can, or is that just freedom of speech? What do you think about this? Can or should that change?
So, who is going to answer? Marius?
Oh, it's unmute. So first of all, about hate speech and personal attacks. On the international level, I think we have the most well-known case in Finland. I forgot the name of the journalist which was attacked, and these persons who attacked her were sued in court, and they were punished. So this is really the case we should follow. But speaking more generally, I really think, and even using our own Lithuanian example, which is very good, I really think that we should speak much more about these examples. When we used our existing laws and existing rules we have, and nothing else is needed, I really think that we should just apply our laws. Because again, and I am coming back to the thing which I was talking about during my this presentation, that it's about political will. And the difference between Lithuania and the other countries in this period of time, that we had this political will 10 years ago. Now the, others are following us when these 10 years passed. So it's always the same. We try to warn the West 20 years ago, or even 25 years ago, even before Putin came to power, that Russia poses a threat against the West. But of course, there were no political will in the West, even at that point, even to listen to that. So it's to my mind, it's not about democracy or about the lack of any laws or regulations. It's much more about political will.
Thank you. Susanne?
Well, concerning Germany, I think it's a problem of a lack of transparency. As I've said, the strategy of Russian media in Germany is to present the official Russian policy line as an alternative and independent opinion. We all know that this is not the case, but unfortunately in Germany, many people believe in this myth because there's not enough information and not enough transparency about ownership. For example, if you look at these new social media companies, Mavic Media and Redfish. So they are English language channels, and part of the editorial office is located in the US. But both of them, they were registered in Berlin, because when they would have been registered in the US, they would have been named as foreign agents. And here in Berlin, they don't have any problems at all. So in the beginning, they didn't indicate at all that the mother company is Raptly, so the video agency. There's also a daughter of RT. And many people and politicians and other people gave interviews to these channels without knowing that they are Russian state channels. And I think this is really a problem. And there's not enough pressure in Germany concerning this topic. So it was thanks to Facebook that deleted the websites of Mavic Media and Redfish for a while. So they were forced to indicate the mother company Raptly. But it was also just for a time, and now it's deleted again. And if you look at the channel in the now, so this one which has more than 5 million followers, so this is really a really important channel, I would say. So if you look at the Facebook side of In the Now, again, there's indicated an American address, and they suggest that they are an American company. And this is not the case at all. And I think this is the problem in Germany, that there's not enough transparency concerning ownership, and it should be clear that all these media are controlled and financed by the Russian Federation. And well, in the beginning, Sputnik and RT Deutsch didn't state this either. Now they do it, but just in the imprint. And I think this is not enough. It should be indicated on the first page. When you open this, you can read this content is financed by the Russian Federation. I think this would be very important, because many people really, they don't know that they are Russian financed and controlled by the state, at least especially this is with regard to this social media companies. And I think there should be stricter legislation concerning this. And I think this is a problem in Germany, because the media is in the competences of the federal lands. And for example, there's this Sputnik radio in the federal lands. It's called Mega Radio. And so, for example, in Berlin-Brandenburg, they didn't get the license to work. And then they moved to another federal land, Hessen, and tried to get it there. And here you can see that Russia actively tries to exploit this lacks of transparency and lacks of legislation, of course. And I think we need a common legislation, and if possible, also a single regulator for whole Germany, like the British Ofcom. I think this would be very important.
Thank you. I will go now on to some questions that we received. So, for example, Vaidotas Molinonis asks what kind of tools the West has to measure the level of impact by disinformation, and what is unacceptable level? What should we do if we face unacceptable level? And actually, I would just add to this question, because really the danger sometimes, or the question is how to measure the success of the disinformation campaign. And for example, in the book of Thomas Reid, where he describes the story of history of effective measures, he has the same question, which is hard to answer for both the perpetrator and for the victim of the attacks. How do we measure? And for example, how to react? Because sometimes if we react to some kind of fringe perpetrator, our reaction, like debunking or fact-checking, even could help to spread the news about the website, about the topic that they want to discuss. And for example, also, like I just checked, as you, Susanne, mentioned, Sputnik Deutschland, they have 268,000 followers, and in Sputnik in Lithuania has only 2,849. So probably the question is, when they spread this information, is to react or to just let the fake die in silence, because if only like few hundred people follow it, so maybe it's not worth to spread this to the wider audience. So what would be your answers to Vaidotas question? So please unmute, Marcus, yeah.
Well, how do we measure the impact of these campaigns? And I've started using a tool called CrowdTangle, which sort of measures the number of hits that a certain piece of information or a website has had on a specific story. It also measures the overall views that these pieces have. And one of the things that I'm looking quite closely at is domestic conspiracy theories. In Canada, we have a site, and anyone who really looks at disinformation will be familiar with globalresearch.ca. This is a website that's been around for nearly a decade, and they promote conspiracy theories about the U.S., about NATO, and it's very anti-Western, anti-NATO in its nature. When we look at who's sharing the information that is posted to places like Global Research, Russia Insider, others, we can see the impact, whether these are being shared on domestic groups or whether they're just being shared by Russian groups. And it's quite remarkable how much of this is being shared domestically, and how much of it is actually being pushed by Facebook groups that are connected directly to the regime. I'd also like to quickly go back to Virginia's question, if I may. I did have an answer. She asked about any sort of instances that are moving through the courts. We don't have any instances like that in Canada. We do have a media regulator that, again, there's no political will to actually go after disinformation. There have been a number of cases that have been taken to the regulator, and they just failed to act on them. They simply ignore them. One of the biggest problems that we have right now in Canada is that both China and Russia are threatening activists and critics. They're targeting us with, whether it's public disinformation campaigns or direct intimidation. I was the focus of such a campaign back in May when I wrote an article about May 9th, exposing Kremlin historical disinformation surrounding May 9th and its liberation of much of Eastern Europe. Immediately after that, Komsomolskaya Pravda wrote a piece about me, and that then was fed back into Canadian pro-Kremlin groups and spread quite widely. There was a petition that was started against me. And the Russian media that does filter here into the Russian-speaking media has radicalized a number of Russian speakers. And I received a waterfall of threats, including death threats. The police here just north of Toronto investigated some of these threats, and they identified the perpetrators. They offered to have charges pressed against them for hate speech. I declined, simply for the fact that these are individuals who have been completely brainwashed by Russian propaganda, and there's no point in ruining their lives. But it just goes to show that there is a very targeted and vicious campaign that's going on right now to try and silence those critics. And this is something that I don't think is widely known, and it needs to be addressed. And the cause of this is a lot of the state-sponsored media that is whipping up this hysteria. So yes, in Canada there is a legal process right now going on with some of this.
Thank you, Susanne.
Well, I think it's you're right. It's really very difficult to measure the influence because we have a lack of statistical data concerning this. But as an evidence, I tried to look at polls, for example, and for example, there was a poll concerning whom do you regard as the most competent leader for foreign problems. And so the first place was occupied by Merkel, but the second place, it was President Putin. And I think here you can see he got even 20%, Merkel 22%. And I think here you can see that the influence, or at least the image of the Russian leadership is quite good in Germany. And I think it's not thanks to these 200,000 followers of Sputnik and 500,000 followers for RT Deutsch on Facebook you've mentioned, but it's thanks to very influential German supporters of the Russian leadership. So we have many influential politicians and journalists, such as former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder. I think this is the most prominent example, who spread Russian narratives on nationwide channels, TV channels, newspapers, and so on. I think this is a much bigger problem than Sputnik and IT themselves. And then, of course, you have many, especially right-wing and left-wing activists and politicians, especially from the party, the left and Alternative for Germany, who interact with Russian media, who advertise them, and they are frequently quoted on Russian media. So this is a sort of media cooperation, one can say, and these parties are also extremely supported in the run of elections, as I've said. So we have seen several elections, and it's, well, I investigated this. So the Russian media especially supported these parties, these fringe parties. And so there's a interconnection, and they boost each other. So this is a network, you know, not only Sputnik and RT Deutsch themselves, but also these German supporters and activists. And so you can say measuring is very complicated, but I would say that the influence is quite high in Germany.
Thank you.
If I can,
Eric? Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I agree. The measurement of these kind of things is extremely complicated and very difficult. We also struggle with it to try to measure what we are trying to do in NATO in terms of public diplomacy. You have all these nowadays with all the social media. You have a lot of quantitative measurements, of course, all the numbers, the likes, the hits, whatever. But I've always learned that ultimately it's about qualitative assessment. What the impact assessment? What has really been the impact on people's minds? Because it's about, you know, trying to change people's minds in a positive way. And I always like to think that, well, you know, perceptions of Russia or China, the average citizen watches the evening news and see what the Chinese are doing with the Uyghurs. They see what they do with Hong Kong. They see what the Chinese are doing now in our countries, buying up critical infrastructure, and our politicians are again becoming increasingly concerned about it. And they state this now also. So there's a much more realization now of what, certainly, for example, China is doing long-term. The same with Russia. I mean, we know what the Russians are doing. The Navalny case, what are they trying to do in Belarus, what they did in Ukraine, what they did in Syria. I mean, people take all these aspects into their minds when they establish an opinion about President Putin or President Xi or whatever. So, and you can't do this in a controlled environment to say, well, what is the effect of this RT thing or what Sputnik did, and take it out of the context from all the other things that are happening that determine people's opinions on this. So, and that's always the problem with measurement, the effect of particular things that Sputnik has done, or how effective their opinion has been. Yes, of course, they can strengthen certain feelings, particularly, and they also know their own audiences. I mean, yes, in Germany, there is a sizable Russian minority living there. Of course, that is a very important audience for RT and Sputnik. that they are specifically addressing as well. But overall, I think, as I said, my impression is that overall, since 2014, we all have learned and seen what these authoritarian regimes are doing. And the overall majority doesn't like what they do. You see all these comments now in the last few days. There was this trip from a high-level Chinese official to Europe, to different European countries. And the overall conclusion was actually, well, he had a tough ride in European capitals. The doors are no longer just wide open for commercial enterprises with these countries. No, we realize we have to be careful. We should not sell out our critical infrastructures of energy companies or and other critical infrastructure in our capitals. We are, I think, in that sense, we have become less naive, and that the same goes for the general public. But it's yes, also educating, and a very important role for the traditional media in educating firstly themselves, but then also their audiences. That's it.
Thank you, Marius.
Just a short remark. I agree with everybody that it's very hard to measure the influence of all this disinformation we get from Russia. But my point would be that here we should apply the proactive strategy. This is much more about our own narrative than about their narrative, just about their narrative. Of course, we should think what to do with their narrative and what influence they can do on our societies. But to my mind, it's much more important to think or at least to think more about our own narrative. And here I will use Susanne's example that, let's say, German politicians, and there are many of them, not just Gerhard Schröder, but German politicians, they themselves provide this Russian narrative. So if we will have the other politicians who will do a very simple thing, just to name things in their own names. I mean, if this regime is killing people, so to call this regime a regime of killers. If they support terrorists, to call them terrorists, and to explain for our audience that that's nothing like we have a difficult partner. That's the main narrative in at least in Western capitals, or even here in Lithuania, is that, yes, okay, Russia is a difficult partner. It's not. It's a mafia state which killing people, which supporting terrorism, which doing many, many things which is not acceptable to our own societies. And if we will call that these people are advocating for cooperation with killers, not with some difficult partner, but with killers. So that would make the change, to my mind.
Thank you, Marius. Now I will ask the question written by our colleague from Odessa, Ukraine, Volodymyr Dubovik. Volodymyr, I'm very happy that you are with us. And he asks, why are these Russian strategies more successful in some countries and less so in others? What makes a society susceptible, and what can be done to make those more vulnerable societies resilient? And this, I will just add to this question also the question by my colleague Victoria Rusunaite, who asks that Russian propaganda attacks vulnerabilities within societies, as Mr. Laurinavičius have noted. Following this thinking, if we would address vulnerabilities such as poverty, racism, social inequalities, corruption, etc., it could strengthen our societies and make them more resilient to disinformation and meddling. To what extent do you think this is true, and what other factors are important for building resilience in general sense in society, but also in the spheres of politics and diplomacy? So I think those two questions are related. So who would like to start now? Yeah, Susanne, please.
Well, I completely agree with Marius. Well, I'm speaking about Germany. I think here the main problem is that many people, politicians are afraid of calling the threats by its name. This is really a problem. For example, when I remind you of Macron, he said directly, RT and Sputnik, they are propaganda tools of the Kremlin. And I think people in France were well informed. But with regard to our government, for example, so the Christian Democrats prefer to keep silence about it. And concerning social democrats, we even can see that former ministers, so the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, he even gave exclusive interview to RT Deutsch in the run-up to the elections, and so did even a top candidate Barley in the run-up to the European elections. And I think this is the wrong approach, because this legitimizes these media as usual and normal media, and I think it should be clear that this is not the case. And so there should be a common approach of the government and officials towards this question. And beside from that, when we look at the opposition, well, I already mentioned parties Die Linke, the left, and Alternative for Germany. So they even go to Syria, they go to Crimea, they go to Russia in order to legitimize foreign policy and also to legitimize so-called elections. And of course, they are being actively exploited by Russian media themselves, who portray them as representatives of the EU. Look here, the EU legitimizes our policy. And I think this is really, these missions abroad, they are really very critical. And I think there should be more information, of course, in German society, as I've already said, also more transparency about the ownership of the media. And of course, we have to improve media literacy. I think in school we should start with that. And I think this would be important to build resilience.
Thank you. Any other remarks? Or, yeah, please, Eric.
Yeah, I think some nations are more open to it than others. I think it's also because of some national events. You know, I'm Dutch, and remember when MH17 happened in the Netherlands. And normally we are all sort of, you know, Russia is far away. I think also Dutch companies are also part of the coalition of companies in the Nord Stream project. So we also have big commercial interest in keeping gas flowing from Russia to Western Europe. But when that happened, I mean, of course, it was a huge shock. And there again, you see how important the leading role of politicians is in a society. If they speak out in a clear way, like what the Dutch Prime Minister did after, of course, MH17, he had no other choice to express his utter revulsion about what happened and demanding full Russian cooperation, finding the culprits. I think that is still crucially important. Yes, transparency, and yes, I mean, there is so much information out there if you want to find it in today's world. You can find anything you like. But still, it's very important that leaders in our societies lead on this and tell it as it is. And of course, yeah, in some countries, there is more appetite for still solid economic relationship with Russia, dependent on, and of course the same goes for China, still nations looking for economic opportunities as well. So how far do you go in criticizing your economic partner politically? I mean, that's always a political challenge, I think, for leaders in our countries. But when a thing like MH17 happens for a country, that of course has a huge shockwave and a big realization amongst almost the entire population, seeing what kind of a regime Russia is. And that really helps in getting the message across. And in other countries, if that doesn't happen, and it goes on as it's going on, then I guess the realization and the knowledge is less present than in, for example, now in the Netherlands. Of course, MH17, it's already again many years ago, so perhaps the memories are fading again. Although, of course, the trial is coming back now and then it's all coming back again. What kind of people we're dealing with in Moscow. Thanks.
Thank you. Any others? Okay, Marcus, and then I will ask the last question for today's discussion.
No, and I agree with all of you that at least in Canada, there's a very real fear about assigning any attribution to any sort of influence or information campaign, disinformation campaigns. This, as Russian media right now, over the past year or so, has been amplifying messages. There's a growing Western secessionist movement here in Canada, and Sputnik has been actively interviewing the leaders. This would otherwise be a tiny fringe movement, but Sputnik, by interviewing the leaders of this separatist movement in Western Canada, are legitimizing the movement itself. And those leaders within that organization use this Russian media, the Sputnik interviews and features on the movement. They share these on Facebook, and through that, people see it. Most Canadians don't understand what Sputnik is. They see these stories, and it legitimizes this movement, and it's growing it. Yet our federal government doesn't want to call any of this out. So we absolutely need to start calling it out in order to combat it. And I agree with literacy. It all comes down to us, as Marius said earlier. It comes down to us as individuals. We need to make sure that our own citizens are able to consume this media that they're seeing on Facebook. Facebook isn't going away, but we need to make sure that our citizens are able, when they see these sorts of stories shared on Facebook, that they know how to safely consume it by checking the sources, checking the claims, and only our government and our people themselves are the front lines in regards to building resilience against disinformation. So digital literacy is key to all this. And I'll go back to my opening remarks, is that countries like Canada have a lot to learn from our partners, and I think we need to start working together far more intensely on this issue rather than in our own little silos. That's the only way. If we can create an alliance of democracies to push back against disinformation, I think that's a key way in defending against it.
Thank you. And Marius, okay? Yeah.
Just one thing to mention. It's about why one countries are more resilient than the others, and what we can do. And I will use just a simple Lithuanian example, a very recent one, even from today. Today, one of our parties, which is participating in next elections in October, so-called Labour Party, Darbo Partija, they expelled one of the politicians from their faction in Vilnius Council. And the leader of the party said that if it was a possibility, they would expel him from the list of the party. The reason was very simple. The reason was that he, on his own Facebook, he shared some information on Ukraine, this Donbass terrorist leader Zakharchenko, which is late already now, and called him a hero. And what made the difference? First of all, I should say that this party, at least I consider the party quite pro-Russian. It is quite pro-Russian party. But what made it, and this particular politician made similar statements, even publicly. He made very similar statements before. But what made the difference? It's an election campaign And I would call it a small public campaign to expose not only this particular politician, but the party as well. And they had no choice just to say, we have nothing to do with it. Even having in mind that before that, the same politician made all these statements and they said nothing about that. So it's, again, it's about us and about the resilience of the society. Because here in Lithuania, it really makes difference.
Thank you, Marius. And the last question for the conclusion would be by the Lithuanian columnist Ramūnas Bogdanas, and he asks why the expert opinion on one particular issue never reaches the political level in the West, and still the same rules are applied to the propaganda and to the media. Could the expert community do something more to get the Western decision makers to understand that propaganda sources have nothing to do with the freedom of speech? So maybe, Marcus, we could start with you, because I know that you would have to leave quite soon, and then we will follow with the closing remarks based on this question. Thank you.
Well, I think, you know, it all comes back down to political will and accepting that propaganda and freedom of speech are completely mutually exclusive. You know, I think we need to ensure that we protect free speech. We allow people to be heard, but when these lines are crossed, when it's state-sponsored media that's producing these narratives, that's when we need to act. You know, one of the things that we can do, I think, at least in the Canadian context, in the Western context, is look at what Australia's done with regards to China, ensuring that we have legislation whereby foreign agents are identified and exposed. You know, Susanne is constantly talking about this, and I thank you for that. You know, ensuring that we know who is pushing out these narratives, and I think, you know, that sort of legislation would be very helpful, certainly in the Canadian context. And I go back to my initial point that I think that our governments, our political leaders, need to be speaking to each other. Our Canadian politicians, I think, would respond positively if they were to hear from Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian policymakers about their experiences, because they do have that direct experience with regards to disinformation. And I think that, you know, if they can hear it from credible, you know, colleagues on the other side of the Atlantic, I think that would make a big difference in combating against it.
Thank you, Marcus. Susanne?
Well, I think I agree with you. The political will is very important, and I think it should be necessary to put it on the political agenda. So I know that EU, for example, they have written an action plan how to boost media literacy, how to challenge this problem of hybrid warfare and information warfare. And I think this should be a topic in Germany. So not only in media, but also only among politicians, how to implement this program. Because of course it's nice to write it, but it has to be implemented, of course. And I think this should be put as a priority on the political agenda, how to face this challenge of information war. And of course it's necessary to provide more information about it. So I use my final remark to point at my third study on Russian media in Germany that will be published next week. So I'm also working on this.
Thank you. We are waiting for your study to read it and yeah, get new insights. Dear Eric, the floor is yours.
I think politicians, even in the West, they know now about the challenge of propaganda and disinformation and where it's coming from. Those already mentioned, the EU particularly is very active in this area with a strategy. They have their own e-Stratcom team, who's doing a great job in making people much more aware, highlighting what's happening, actually get the facts out and see what's happening. So that in itself has, and the whole strategy also the EU is engaging with social media companies that they should do a better job in moderating their platforms and get fake news and hate speech and trolls out of their systems, how difficult it is, but actually they are moving, and the EU is really playing a big role there. So I think, and that's supported by its political leaders. So I think that is there. We always have to remember that national media cultures are different. I mean, I know that it was already mentioned in the UK, for example, you have Ofcom, a media regulator. I think they have been very active in also identifying and even taking actions against Russia Today and even Sputnik in the UK, maybe even giving fines. I don't know what the UK law or regulations allow them to do. But for example, in my country, and I think also Susanne will maybe say in Germany, yes, the freedom of expression is highly regarded. So anything like going to sort of shutting down so-called media outlets, that's a step that many people in my country would not want to do, and say, well, then it's up to the others to highlight what nonsense these outlets are saying, but they have a right to say it. I mean, it's a freedom of expression, it's different opinions, and if you want to challenge it, but we should not shut it down. That's perhaps the wrong approach. I think that's a sense, I think, in many European countries, because I know when, I think in Latvia or Lithuania or in Estonia, when also the government took steps towards RT, I noticed some voices certainly also in my country who said, well, that's not really the right way to do this. So I think there are different viewpoints about this, different cultures in different countries based on history. And maybe also, because the Netherlands is further away from Russia than the Baltics are, and you have a direct experience what it is, having lived under the Soviet Union and under the propaganda there. We don't have that in my country, so there is much more reluctance to be ready to take very far-reaching decisions against, taking out some media outlets as they are still called. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Marius.
Just as a final statement, just to summarize what I said. For me, the recipe fighting this hybrid warfare is quite simple. It's look at your own vulnerabilities in a broader sense. It's not just like Victoria described it, but everywhere. If you are vulnerable in any sphere of your life or a life of your society, of your state, you will be hit by the adversary, by enemy, by we can name it by Russia or China. So first of all, you should look at your own vulnerabilities. Then the thing is to apply a proactive strategy. That is for me very, very important. And the last thing is just to admit that we can't sometimes we can't do much about our adversary or about the behavior of our adversary. So of course we need to develop all kinds of strategies how to combat this all the strategy which is applied by adversary, but at the same time it's not less important to look at ourselves. What can we do, or how can we change ourselves, our societies, our attitudes, and our political will? This is for me is a recipe to fighting back this hybrid warfare.
Thank you, everyone. I would like to say thanks to Susanne Spahn, Eric Povel, Markus Kolga, Marius Laurinavičius for participating in this year's event. And also special thanks to NATO Public Diplomacy Division for extending their support to this discussion. I would like to say that Vilnius consultations aren't over. On Tuesday, the 22nd of September, we will meet to discuss the situation in Belarus with Artem Schreibman, the Belarusian political analyst, Anna Ismarin, United Nations Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Belarus, and my colleague Victoria Rusinaite. So please join us in next Tuesday, and I wish you a pleasant evening, and it was a very fruitful evening, especially, for example, for me to hear your insights and to have some food for further thoughts. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.